The recording has started.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so dear members, we welcome you all to this very important and interesting webinar. Good afternoon and good morning to you wherever you are. We want to welcome you to the Africa NCA or Natural Capital Accounting Community of Practice webinar series. And in today's webinar, as you have all received the webinar invitation, is being organized with the Africa NCA Community of Practice Secretariat in partnership with our key partner institution that is focusing on the private and business sector, the Capitals Coalition. And today's webinar, its title and theme is focusing on natural capital accounting for business. So we welcome you all to this very important webinar, and we look forward for a very interactive discussion. And first and foremost, I would like to thank our partner institution, Capitals Coalition, here today, being represented by Hannah, who is going to be our moderator. Thank you, Hannah, for this very important webinar that we are organizing today that is focusing on how NCA can support businesses to make better decisions and sustainability integration into their business decision making. So the objective of this webinar is focusing on raising awareness and understanding within the community of practice on how and why businesses are applying natural capital concepts. It will also highlight the importance of public-private partnership and collaboration to implement this agenda of natural capital accounting within the African member states. We want to thank all of you for the work that you're doing within your respective countries to implement NCA. As you know, this community of practice entirely focuses on making sure that the tools and the frameworks that are available to support countries to better understand and value their natural resources, manage the environmental challenges, and also contribute in terms of addressing to climate change. So this is an opportunity for us to learn from this webinar together with our partner institution, Capitals Coalition, to see how can private businesses, specifically small and medium enterprises, can use these tools to better understand the impacts and dependencies of nature and natural values within their business decision making, but also to drive the agenda of sustainable development within their respective businesses, also contributing to the sustainable development goals within their member states. And also, we will try to explore the opportunities that are available with the current natural capital accounting project within Africa. How can the data which is being generated by private sector and governments and other international organizations serve the sector of private sector and businesses? And what are the opportunities to work together and to partner in terms of getting financial resources to invest in data that can serve businesses to implement NCA within African member states? So I would like to really thank Capital Coalition for organizing this webinar, and we look forward to have a productive webinar, and we welcome you all, and please feel free to engage and send all your comments, inputs, questions in the chat as the webinar starts from now onwards, and then we will come back during the Q&A to answer some of those questions and concerns and clarifications. So with that, I would like now to hand over to Hannah to moderate the session. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you. Well, great. It's really great to be here. I think that's the first thing to say, is that it's a real privilege to share this work with this group. I know the expertise that's on the call today, so we're not presenting solutions, unfortunately. We're not presenting a closed case. we're starting a conversation, I think, with this work. And, you know, at the end, we'll leave loads of time for discussion at the end of the call. So the emphasis is on, you know, understanding how this work lands with you, with the work that you're doing, and whether there's any ideas that we can take forward, I think. So yeah, just quickly to say, myself, I'm a director at the Capitals Coalition. I'll introduce the coalition in a second for those who aren't familiar. And I'm also joined with Debanjana, who's joining me from Delhi. She's a senior manager at Just Impact and has been our technical partner on the case studies. So you'll hear from us both over the next 30 minutes. So just to come to the Capitals Coalition, then, you might have seen our logo floating around. We've been involved with the community of practice since the beginning. And that's because we share, both organizations and groups share the acknowledgement that society and the systems in place at the moment are failing to address the challenges, the greatest challenges affecting humanity today. For us, we categorize those as nature loss, climate change, and inequality, and seeing those as consequences of the economic system that prioritizes financial capital gains over all else, over nature, people, and society. And for us, our approach is to capture those other elements as natural capital, social capital, and human capital, and to try to raise awareness and understanding that the value that those non-financial capitals bring to the economy. So we're not just natural capital focused, we're trying to take a holistic approach, and our ambition is that by 2030 the majority of businesses and governments and financial institutions will start to recognize the value beyond just financial capital in decision making. So it's quite a big ambition. We acknowledge that it's a process. So the way we frame this is, you know, starting back in the turn of the millennium, the kind of the work of the pioneers and the leading thought leader businesses, a lot of individuals coming forward and proposing solutions based on natural capital. Certainly that's kind of the time frame that we've seen in the corporate world, I would say, with a few business leaders really emerging, and then building up to more mainstreaming, more peer pressure, more expectation, until ultimately around 2030 you start to get to more standardization and more formal expectation of capital's information in corporate management and disclosure. So that's the journey that we're on. This particular project is a lot more specific. Most of our work is done with really large multinational companies who have large budgets and sustainability departments to work with, and something that's always come up for us is, you know, how do we engage with SMEs? And certainly in a continent like Africa, we acknowledge that SMEs are, you know, an enormous economic player. So unless you can introduce solutions that work for them, then you're working on a really small slice of the pie. So our primary objective for this has been to provide value to those small businesses, give them new perspectives, and hopefully new weight to inform their decision making and to make the process useful for them. So they have always been our target audience. Within that, though, was a test, I think, for us to see whether natural capital valuation and the approaches that we've been promoting through the Natural Capital Protocol for the last 10 years or so are useful and are accessible and are valuable for small businesses. You know, are they, do they provide a good enough return on investment given the time and the resource that a business would have to put into doing an assessment like this? Does the ratio make sense for them? And that's where this relationship with the SME 360X methodology comes into play, because Just Impact have been having the same conversation, and their solution is this purpose-built methodology to allow SMEs to do this type of assessment. So that's the relationship here, and we thought, great, this is a good opportunity to test the methodology and hopefully bring some value to small businesses. We also partnered with the African Leadership University and the School of Wildlife Conservation there. We had 7 second and third year students who acted as our analysts. So they were the ones doing the data collection and putting all the numbers together. So a great learning process, I think, for them, but also for us, and hopefully upskilling, you know, a community of young students who understand valuation and hopefully can enter this community. So they're not on the call today, but it was a real privilege to work with them as well. So just to overview on the SMEs that we worked with, we decided to focus on 2 sectors to keep it focused and, you know, develop our narratives kind of within particular contexts. We chose coffee growing and processing and tourism, nature-based tourism. So a lot of safari camps, primarily because of their economic significance in East Africa. But also because we felt, interestingly, these are sectors where potentially sustainability is starting to emerge as a kind of differentiator. It's potentially something that customers and clients are starting to look for when they buy products or trips. And it's just an interesting place, I guess, to see the evolution of sustainability and environmental impact emerge in value for these businesses. So yeah, as you can see, we worked across East Africa. We had 7 companies in total. And what was really interesting is we targeted the businesses because of their interest and because of they were keen to understand more, but all of them had completely different starting points. So some of the companies had 10 years of sustainability data on Excels going back, you know, categorizing, cataloging their water consumption, their energy consumption, you know, the vehicle use over time. Brilliant, fantastic, more than we were expecting. Others were at the complete other end and they didn't have bills, they didn't have utility bills to refer to, so we were estimating everything. So for us, it was a really good test in data collection, and the way we started that data collection was starting with operational data, I would say. So things like understanding how many vehicles they've got, what they're used for, the models, bills for fuels and utilities, how they process water, whether on site or they're using an inner city infrastructure. We also kind of ran through all of the activities that were taking place on site, so quite site specific. So for the tourism camps, you know, a lot of them were using kerosene lamps to light paths. So there's another fossil fuel going into the system there. And then the coffee processors, those that were roasting coffee, there's also process emissions coming out of the roasting. So based on the business models, we were able to kind of identify the activities that were generating emissions and kind of go through like that. We also had quite qualitative discussions about their biodiversity efforts. Many were investing in reforestation exercises or conservation efforts. They were donating to conservation efforts. So qualitative and quantitative, I would say. So that's kind of the context, and I'm now going to hand over to Debanjana, who's going to explain more about what happened to that data and what we did with it next. So Debanjana, over to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Hannah, and thank you NCA for this wonderful opportunity. As Hannah mentioned, I am from Just Impact, and before I move on to this slide, I think the critical point to mention is Just Impact is an organization which has worked tirelessly for the last 16 years in the space of impact economics. And one of the key things that we focus on is looking at environmental externalities, definitely, but providing a monetized estimate for the same. So one of the reasons why we do that, or why we focus on monetizing it, is to ensure that, you know, we have a common parlance to bring all the KPIs for a particular business on a platform for an organization to make their strategic decision. So drawing to Peter's point where he initially started the discussion with, for small businesses, one of the key problems that we have seen is the lack of a particular cohesive tool or a data gathering platform which will have benchmarks which is suitable for their kind of operational scale. And the second that we have seen is in terms of how do they cross compare. So which is where this sort of lens which we look at, which is known as the drivers outcome impacts approach, works very well. This fundamentally informs any of our methodology in-house for doing environmental profit and loss analysis. Typically, we look at 6 key drivers for looking at the environmental economic profit and loss, which would be GHG, air pollution, water extraction, water and land pollution, waste generation, and land use change. But the overall approach that we take towards doing this sort of methodology deep dive in terms of doing this sort of monetization or the estimation of the natural capital externalities would be dividing them into this drivers outcome impacts analysis. What we typically mean by a driver would be any intent to change or an activity which is undertaken by an organization which would lead to certain amount of change. The change here could be both positive or negative. Outcome and impact, on the other hand, would correlate to outcome being the immediate impact to the environment, which can be seen, whereas impact is more to do with the well-being, which is the long-term implication of that particular driver or the activity of an organization towards the larger community, environment, and many other stakeholders. So with that in mind, we have a tool in place, which is the SME 360X. We will definitely dwell deeper into the tool, but what we did for this assessment was an environmental profit and loss analysis for the 7 SMEs from the coffee as well as the tourism sector. What was appreciated was this sort of cross comparison, and a key to the entire analysis was the location specificity of the coefficients, which meant that if you're from Kenya, an organization participating from Kenya, and an organization participating from, say, Tanzania, the results would automatically change, considering that particular area that they are participating from, where their operations are, it might be drought prone, right? Whereas in another location, it's possible that the carbon sequestration cost there might be much higher. So keeping these factors into play, the GIST methodology always takes into account the location specificity. The entire globe in-house has been broken up into 50 by 50 square kilometer grid to ensure that even if an organization as small as an SME with say 200 or 50 employees for that matter, operational in 2 different sites, their entire perspective or the environmental journey might be completely different. Hannah, if we can go to the next slide. Just a quick example, because for each of the KPIs that I mentioned, the 6 KPIs, there is an individual methodology that we follow, which is scientifically rigorous and takes into account multiple external databases, secondary research, as well as primary data to put together a modeling exercise. Here I'm taking an example, say, of air pollution for a cement manufacturing company. So what we typically do is, first we need, or the only data point that we would probably need from the organization would be the total pollutant discharge in terms of their SOx, NOx, and the particulate matter piece. In the tool itself, in the platform itself, there are drop-down options from where a particular organization can choose from. But internally, once they have provided us, or once they did provide us with that information, we did what we call as the dispersion modeling to understand which are the locations, that the pollutants have been concentrated to. We, with the help of meteorological data set to look at the wind speed, we have access to the NASA satellite database, whereby we look at their concentration modeling piece. We multiply this or overlay the population density of that particular area, and back end we also look at the WHO database to correlate each pollutant's kind of implication, health implication for the communities in that particular location. So all of it put together together, a monetary valuation number is estimated in terms of owing to the environmental impact. What is the kind of human health impact which is, caused to the community? So this was just a quick example of air pollution, and we'll have this in-depth methodology for each of those KPIs. Moving to the 7 SMEs that we had targeted for this pilot exercise along with Capital's Coalition, emphasizing the point that Hannah already mentioned, the range or the diversity of the participants was really good for us to learn from. On the higher end of the spectrum were organizations who were not only tracking data, but they were meticulous about the results. They, in fact, sat with us and tried to understand the methodology, the details of the methodology, how we assessed it, what sort of coefficient we use, what sort of databases were being used, which was super exciting for us. And they are the ones who could use this sort of information, or this platform provided them a range or a tool which would help for further strategic decision making. Whereas there were also organizations who were early in their sustainability journey. So they were beginners in their overall sustainability journey, where they wanted to start. They had the intent to start their journey, but this tool acted as a first stop solution for them to kickstart their entire journey. So the overall questionnaire, or the way in which the data was also requested from the organization, became a set internal norm for them, probably, to gather that sort of information internally. So that was a great experience for us to see. But interestingly, what we've seen is, apart from the negative contribution that these organizations had from the environmental damages or the environmental externalities that they caused owing to their operation, there were a lot of positive instances, which was refreshing. Which was refreshing for us, and the kind of case examples that we received from tourism and coffee processing were different. A couple of examples which I thought would be super interesting to discuss as a team would be that of the walking safaris. So one of the camps that we were working with, they wanted to test this positive model that they had shifted to as a part of their sustainability initiative, which is introduction of walking safaris. What they fundamentally did was, for that entire piece, I think almost, if I'm not mistaken, around 700 to 750 safaris, normal safaris, where they would have used a game drive, they made it into a walking safari where the ecosystem services there could be explored, that area could be explored by walking. What this did was that there was a huge reduction in the amount of diesel usage, and obviously we had calculated the avoided impacts there. For other organizations who were beginners, who were just starting their process, they had other mechanisms of documenting their positive change. So they either opted for waste recycling, or they opted for purchasing carbon offset. So all of this actually contributed, and the tool, along with their assessment, did account for this sort of avoided impact. The coffee processing units particularly was super interesting. There are 3 instances which were particularly stark and worth mentioning. One was an organization which looked at recycling, which looked at reuse of delivery cartons and packaging material, which had brought down their overall negative impact on waste substantially. So which was great. That was a very easy yet a very thoughtful way of ensuring avoided impacts for the waste KPI. Whereas there was one particular organization in the coffee processing who had who wanted to understand what if they opted out of the technical mechanism and looked for EV support, right? If they used electronic vehicle, how does that change that entire piece? So for 2 such organizations, we actually did this kind of scenario modeling or scenario mapping. One was with the EV, and another was an organization where we did a kind of site comparison between site A versus site B. The EV case was interesting because as soon as they, opted out of traditional mode of functioning or transport to EV, it automatically led to a huge reduction, I would say, in terms of their environmental damage, which was causing, particularly for the air pollution KPI, because the diesel use had gone down substantially. Also for the GHG component, the scope 1 had reduced substantially. So it was a win-win situation for them. And the learnings for them on and how they did peer learning as well was to pass on that message to others as well, that moving to EV would be like a good option. For the third organization, they were hoping to treble their entire production, and they were trying to look at a new location per se. So we did a kind of scenario mapping, trying to understand how much would the environmental impact, increase or decrease. The good news was that in comparison to the scale of or the margin of growth for that organization, the environmental impact increase was substantially, pretty standard or quite lower. So in all these cases, which we mentioned, positive examples did come out. It was a good storytelling and narrative for the organizations to their external stakeholders, particularly to their consumers. So this is something that they can take back to their consumer, their journey. This was currently, I feel, was being documented, but the tool or this entire exercise that we did together did channelize their entire effort, and we are hoping that they concretize it further in their future decision making. If we can move on to the next slide, Hannah. So in terms of the overall reactions after this entire exercise was over, the key take home for us was that the exercise was a success. Yes, there were minor hiccups in terms of data collection, particularly from SMEs who were just starting out, who were trying to understand what would be the best way to collect that information. A little bit of hand-holding definitely was there. But having said that, the questions that came from their end that, we did it for one location, can we replicate this for the next location? The positive response from, another camp coming saying that EV would be a good option. It meant that, as Hannah mentioned, we initiated a conversation together. We were successful to start talking about sustainability, talking about data collection, talking about the constraints of data collection in a positive way. So that was our overall take home from this entire exercise. If we can move to the next slide. Right. So in this entire process, where comes the tool, right? And how does SME 360X play a role? So when we were doing our kind of market research or trying to understand or talk to SMEs to gather information from them, where are they in the sustainability curve? We realized there was a huge lack of such, tools and resources, most importantly, dialogue around this discussion of bringing in, natural capital accounting into picture, which is where SME 360X as a tool was simple to use, easy to access, and it provided benchmarks, sectoral benchmark as well. So that was our starting point to bring about this entire narrative. We do have an enterprise platform. We shifted from there to more of an SME-centric lens because we realized that this audience needs to be targeted. There's a huge demand. It's more about channelizing the initiative. But in the process, we realized the entire process had a lot of positives. The one key thing that we realized was it was data heavy. When you're asking an SME, say a Safari, to provide you information about, say, how much ton of waste you collect, there will be organizations who have it documented meticulously. And we found there were organizations who were clueless. And the hand-holding was quite high, right? So for these 7 SMEs, it was not a problem. But basing on the other experiences that we had, we realized that it's important to simplify our tool. It is important to ensure that we introduce components which will ease the SME, and they would want to join us in this overall dialogue, which is where the current version of the SME, which is the SME 2.1, which is the next slide, Hannah, has allowed for what we call as an advanced user experience using modeled data gap filling. So there is an option for, for instance, you're an SME, you're a Safari, and you're tracking information for GHG and for air pollution, but you are not being able to track that sort of information for waste or say for water consumption. In that case, there is an option which is inbuilt for data gap filling into the platform. So Having said that, during this exercise, we also realized there are SMEs who strive for accuracy, who would want that exact number to be represented. So what this tool has currently done is it has allowed to capture that range of SMEs to come and, join the platform. If you have less data, you can start with this sort of, gap filling mechanism, which will give you a high level estimate. At the same time, if you have the information, you have the willingness to deep dive, we are there to handhold and provide that sort of support to ensure that, you can reach a stage where you get your accurate information. We've also added a section on recommendations and insights, which is based on sector specificity, would allow them some time or a common platform to engage in that dialogue. And thirdly, we have the ICC certification, which is the International Chamber of Commerce certifications. Once you complete the SME 360X tool, this could be used to showcase your product. It could be a branding on your products that you display. In any way that you want to communicate that you are an environmentally friendly organization, an organization who is starting their journey in sustainability assessment. It need not mean that you're 100% there. It just means we've taken the first step, and that's important, and which is what ICC is here with us to recognize and support. The next slide, I think, has just quick view of how the platform looks like, more in terms of the user experience. It allows for estimation of environmental data for certain KPIs where you feel that you're not being able to track. It shouldn't be holding you back from starting your entire journey to track or into monetized impact mapping. At the same time, the dashboard, what it does is, apart from the absolute number, it also provides you a relative number, which would be the impact intensity number, which helps you compare yourself against your sectoral peers. So in the coffee business or in the tourism business, how are you doing against other peers? So 38% in this case would probably mean that the organization is midway. There are organizations who are doing worse, but there are a lot of organizations who are doing well as well. So 0 being the lowest and 100 being the highest. So this is a range, and there's also sector-specific insights which are provided to the organization. Finally, the next slide says there's an option for certification as well as pledge setting as well, which will allow an organization to start the right dialogue with their board representatives. And it's important to mention here that SMEs, many a times that we have interacted with, are part of or suppliers to larger organizations. So they might be doing this sort of assessment as a form of documentation of scope 3 of the target organization. So in that particular process, setting these pledges or setting their organizational goals for the next 6 months or the next 1 year, and tracking it continually, because you can keep editing your information and seeing where you are, how can you improve. That will help the organization with their overall strategic journey. Great. Over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Debanjana. Yeah, I think what's so interesting about this is the progression from data gathering and building the picture, building the dashboard, but then following through into the decision making and the consequence for validating the work that the SMEs are doing. And I think that was always the intention, was never to gather data for data's sake, but to really use it and apply it and make it meaningful and useful for the businesses. So yeah, really good stuff. So just a few kind of conclusions, I think, on kind of what we've learned from this process. I think as a headline, natural capital information and monetary valuation of impacts is welcome by small businesses. They were really able to use the information, and some of those examples that Debanjana was talking about. I mean, I guess this is to say it didn't always, hardly ever revealed anything that the business didn't already know. There weren't any massive shocks, but I think in a way that's also really great, because it was actually, you know, they understand their operations already, you know, they're working really closely, they know the communities that they're operating in, they know the ecosystems they're working in, so often they have an instinct already. What these numbers did was to actually help kind of reinforce maybe decisions or instincts about where they needed to invest next, and that was really great to see. It kind of gave the validation to maybe pivoting, taking a new direction. The practicality is absolutely essential. You know, we saw that, making sure that terms were accessible, making sure that the data input was accessible, really important. You know, they don't have spare staff members lying around to do this. Who does? But also kind of the flip side of that is to not get pulled in too much to simplicity. And I thought that was really interesting, that actually maintaining technical detail and credibility and granularity was really, really important. You know, like I said, these are small operations working on small sites. And if you start to overestimate, they know and they care, because it doesn't give them the detail that they know is there. So really great attention to detail, and I think that's just an interesting tension to navigate. You know, how do you make things really practical and accessible but maintain their technical integrity? So that's kind of something for us to take forward as well. Simplification isn't actually always the answer. We had a lot of examples of positive impact or avoided impacts, you know, recycling or initiatives like those walking safaris or reforestation around some of the coffee plantations. So capturing that positive impact actually really important as well. And it's not only negative. And then the other thing to kind of finally touch on is that there's, I think what's great about this is it, for the businesses we worked with, they were all individually really motivated to demonstrate the impact that they were having. And that, I think there's an interesting kind of top-down, bottom-up dynamic going on there, where, you know, you have the supply chain leaders, the buyers maybe of the, you know, the people buying the coffee product at the other end, who are looking to understand their own supply chains a little bit better and bring SMEs along. And I think if you can meet that with also data and willing from the SME community, then there's something quite powerful there. And Debanjana, did you just want to come in here and say something about the regulatory landscape as well?
Right. On the regulatory space, one of the key things that we have observed is for larger organizations, the SMEs who are part of the supply chain. One key thing that we have seen is larger organizations are getting the regulatory push in terms of compliance to CSRD, compliance to TNFD, and all these standards, in a way, like CSRD directly does, talks about looking at monetized impacts mapping. So what it technically does is ensures that the SMEs or small scale organizations are well equipped to handle that sort of regulatory pressure, which might come their way in the very near future, owing to this sort of, you know, regulatory shift. So that is just that last point which I wanted to add before we kind of open the floor. And yeah.
Brilliant, thanks. So yeah, so we just wanted to open it up, really. I mean, I think there's a couple of trends that we saw coming out of this that would be interesting to get your thoughts. So one, I think, is around how data can be made more accessible. You know, are there, how data flows, can we design it to better serve the needs of the private sector is an interesting question. Whether tools like this have a wider applicability and whether they can help accelerate data gathering, you know, kind of at a larger scale. Whether there's other priority sectors that you think need to be looked at. And then a kind of really large scale question is again to come back to public-private partnerships on natural capital data and getting information flowing, because there's clearly a demand for it. So just some kind of prompts there, I suppose, things that we kind of took away with us that would be really interesting to get your thoughts on. So we'll leave it open. I think, as Peter said, do leave your comments in the Q&A and or the chat. I'm not sure which one we're using, but while those are coming in, I think also just a little in this box here is just a note that this tool is still available. It's still undergoing development. You said there was a 2.0, Debanjana, I think 2.1.
Yeah, it's ready, it is live. And for individual SMEs, we are happy to set up your account. Please join us in this journey together. Just write to us at info@sme360x.com, and we will have our support team reach out to you and help you set up that account and get started. So yeah, we're very excited that you pass on this message to your organizations, to your allied organizations, SMEs, other organizations who can benefit from taking this first step. We would really encourage you to join us.
I think that's the thing. If there's those of you on the line who maybe know of an SME that might be interested, do reach out. I can see the word free on the screen, Debanjana, which is quite a dangerous word to put up there, but
it is, and we've done that on purpose, because we did not want a monetary expense to be an inhibition to start taking this assessment, because it's a huge step to acknowledge that you're on this journey. And if we can support an SME in doing that, we are very, very happy to do that. So thus the emphasis on free, not in any other way, but to emphasize that we are here to support. So if there's any way that
you just dropped off, Debanjana. You've just gone on mute.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are now. Just lost the last sentence. That was all.
Yep. So I'm just saying, didn't want a monetary bid to be any hindrance for an SME to rethink to take this assessment with us. So, which is why I think the emphasis on free.
Great, brilliant, cool. Okay, well, I can see a couple of questions coming in. So there was one that. Yeah, so there was one about kind of regularity, about whether there's any checkup or whether it's a once-off. And I saw that you commented that the encouragement from GIST is to do this annually, so that there's kind of up-to-date data. Is that right? And that opens the comparison point as well, so you can see whether your decisions have had a consequence on your impact. So there's a question about testimonials. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question. Yes, we're in the process of gathering them at the moment. A couple of the SMEs were planning to join today, but unfortunately weren't able to make it. So we didn't hear from them. So you'll have to forgive us slightly for delivering their kind of verdict secondhand. But yeah, we're in that process. And I think what we would like to do soon, we'll publish the individual case studies on the website over the next couple of months, and also a kind of synthesis report as well, just to capture those feedback, not only on the data, but also on the process and how accessible it was. So when we have that, we'll make sure we're able to share it with you. So Debanjana, one here for you from Kamweti. Good support on the impact of SMEs on environment. What about natural assets that an SME may have, whether on the books or not, like grasslands, woodlands, on a community conservancy? Do you support valuation of natural capital assets?
Right, I think excellent question. And it kind of leads us to the hot topic, discussing biodiversity in a way. One aspect of it is covered in the current tool itself, which is in the form of land use change. That mostly looks at, probably because of your operations, maybe there has been a transition in terms of an asset. In that case, what has been the land use change for that particular location? It's inbuilt, and definitely we capture that. But even at an advanced level, if you want to look at a detailed deep dive, we have methodologies in place, which is not part of this tool, because the idea of this tool was to make it simple and easy for an SME to start their journey. But the more layered you want the analysis to be, we have our additional technical advisory support there to help with that. But to simply answer, the land use change KPI itself on the platform will actually facilitate a lot with documenting this component.
So I hope that answered your question, Kamweti. I just wonder whether there's a great. Okay, good. And I can see that Oliver's raised a hand. So Peter, I might need you to help me with lowering the hand, with allowing Peter to speak, Oliver to speak, sorry. Oh, here we go. I don't know whether Leona or Peter, you can. I've lost the hand now.
Probably you could just type in your question and we'll try our best.
Yeah, try that, Oliver. Sorry. Another one. So, Joanna, go ahead. You're very, very, very quiet.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Peter. Yeah. And
Yeah.
Joanna's
I think
just off
it's
on.
like, I think it should be shared. Can you help us to unmute Juan to make his interventions?
Here you go.
Hello.
We can hear you. Yes. Hello.
Yeah, you can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this winning back. I'm from Sierra Leone in the west coast of Africa. The problem I have with the natural capital accounting for business, really, we know data collection is one of the most difficult issues in doing business. But I had in the presentation, Hannah and the others, we are talking about data accessibility and data flow. But for me, it's about the strategies. What strategies do we use to collect data on those projects? That is one of my concerns. The other one is about the environmental damage that those projects cause to the environment. We all know the environment is very key these days. Climate change is an issue. How would you, as organization, how would you help other countries, like particularly in Africa, to minimize the issue of climate change and environmental damages? Thank you so much. Hello.
Yeah, hi. I think we've lost Hannah. We can wait a couple of minutes.
Right.
Yep. Yes, Hannah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to start, Debanjana, and then jump in. So yeah, Joanna, on your question about data collection, the emphasis was to keep it as much as possible on data that the companies would already have. So we were using things like utility bills. If they didn't know the distance that their vehicles had traveled, we were equating fuel consumption, fuel efficiency, and therefore turning that into distance. So wherever data was missing, we were finding a way to estimate it or calculate it. We were using things like, I'm just trying to remember, asking them how many bags of waste they were leaving out every week. And then from that, we were taking an average weight and we were using that to calculate, potentially the waste disposal emissions. So everything, as much as we could calculate and take off the SMEs as possible, we were trying to do that to keep them kind of focused on the kind of primary data that they had, rather than put the focus on them for coming up with numbers that they didn't have. That's where the students were able to step in and were really valuable for calculating and estimating and filling in any gaps. So I don't know whether there's anything else you want to add to that, Debanjana, and then we can come to the second part. No? Okay. Yeah, and then a really interesting question. I think you're right. This type of work does really well at quantifying impact and understanding where it happens. But what matters is that next part about, okay, well, how do we start to manage it? And I think that happens in two ways. I think one is, the power that information can give. And we talked about, one of the companies took this data to an investor and started making the case to get an electric vehicle, which we know they now have. So for them, that kind of validation process, building up to making a decision, making a big investment, evidencing the return that investment would have was a great success to see. But where this tool, I think, in my perspective, Debanjana come in is that ability for comparison at the sector level. And I think where we start to see real takeoff is where expectations for sectors slightly shift, and where you can get more peer-to-peer comparison, and where that kind of translates up the value chain, and you start seeing performance as emerging as the differentiator. So it's, I mean, that's the big question around how do you change performance across whole sectors. So I don't know whether you want to add something to that, Debanjana.
Yep, bang on, Hannah.
Okay. Okay, great. So we've got 5 minutes left. So let's a question from Aldo. Skeptical on the possibility of public-private cooperation as far as monetary valuation is concerned. Valid point, particularly considering the whimsical nature of such valuation. But also, what does monetary valuation add in practice to our knowledge of an enterprise's activity impacts? And why should an enterprise be interested in the external social costs of its operations or its potential to abate pressures if the actual transmission gear from these costs, if there is no actual transmission from these costs to its real budget? So I think the question is this a little bit abstract? And why should we be interested in monetary valuation? Debanjana, I'll hand that to you.
Yep, sure. Like I hear you. I completely hear you. I understand your frustration there. 2 points which I wanted to tell you. Will that like completely answer you? I'm not sure, but I'm hoping it might ease you. One is the methodology that we are following, and that is one example which I gave for air pollution, is standardized. We have like our logic flow in place as to why we are doing what we are doing. And each of it has, references and cross-references to multiple databases. It has taken us years to develop that sort of methodology to ensure consistency, and for us to move from, say rating agencies, the way they look at, data, or what can you make of rating of various organizations, to a consistent approach which helps you monetize impact. Now, coming to the second point, why monetized impact? Think of it, you are an organization XYZ in a particular sector, right? Your fellow peer might be in the same sector, but different scale of operations completely, right? Or you are wanting to compare your pieces with some other sector. So bringing all of this to a common parlance becomes super important for allowing for that cross comparison. Like as an organization, you cannot operate in silos, whether be it in your sector, in your region, or in your country, or in that entire ecosystem where you're working at. So what monetary evaluation there does is gives you a valid unit, gives you, and through scientifically proven method, to come to a common ground to say that this is the kind of environmental matrix, or this is the kind of environmental cost that I'm doing to the environment, at the same time the positive pieces that I'm creating. So that allows for a better narrative and a better dialogue and a better decision with any sort of stakeholders, and which is what we were trying to say. It's within your organization when you're trying to internally ideate on like, what should my next strategy be? So this will help you understand that, okay, my waste numbers are slightly higher, or air pollution are just off the chart as compared to my sector. So this is one area where I need to strategize. So it allows for that internal dialogue, at the same time external dialogue, where somebody or any stakeholder, be it government, be it your consumers, be it other peers, be it other organizations questioning you, these matrix become standardized way to respond, to say that we hear you, this is what we have, this is what the work in progress is. So like what you're saying, it is a work in progress, right? And the monetary evaluation, we hope, will add that lens, that common lens, to contribute to that overall discussion. Over to you, Hannah. I'm sure you'll have something to add here.
I don't think there's anything else I can say to that, no. So I hope that helped on that point. Have you got anything to say, Debanjana, in about 30 seconds on data and knowledge management and connections to big data? I mean, what's GIST's vision in what would be your the thing that you
We
would
are
love.
all about knowledge management, and we are all about, connection to big data. And that's the back-end logic that we have in place. There are like thousands of algorithms which has gone in to simplify it into a platform. That would be my like simplistic answer. And if you want like more information, write to us. We can walk you through that entire methodology, KPI KPIs, to explain the level of granularity, the level of data management which has gone in for creation of that methodology.
Okay, so Dawit, maybe take a note of the email that's on the screen. It sounds like there's a bigger conversation to be had there, and maybe one for a later webinar. Anyway, we're at time. We're only doing an hour today. So Peter, I don't know if you're there, and I'll hand back over to you.
I'm here. And the excellent discussion. Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you so much, Debanjana, on this wonderful discussion. So I've seen the interaction and the interest. So I want to inform the participants here that we will share this recording and we will share the presentation. And please reach out to myself, the coordinator for the community of practice, if you want to reach out to the team, Hannah and the Banjana. But please feel free, even this, we will post it on our website. You can go to the website and even take the discussion there. And then we'll come back to you with any information you need. As you know, this is an opportunity. It's a free assessment evaluation tool which is available. Please reach out within your respective countries and interest businesses to join this. And I like the discussion about the value addition of this, because at the end of the day, you need to know your impacts on the environment, but at the same time, you need to know your dependency on the environment. So this is an opportunity for you to do this assessment so that you can know where you stand in comparison with your peers. So we welcome you to reach out to all of us, and let's continue the discussion on our other platform and reach out to all these members. Thank you very much for a very interactive discussion, and we wish to see you next month for another webinar. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.
So much.
Bye.